In this video, I'm going to explain two things. I'm going to explain the bond market, and I'm going to explain Bitcoin. I'm going to explain what the inherent problem with the bond market is and why it is not sustainable. And I'm going to explain why that means that Bitcoin is going to go up in terms of US dollars, why Bitcoin is going to 100,000, 500,000, a million, 5 million, 50 million, 500 million, and onwards from there. Okay, so I'm going to break it down, explain how it works, and this is really not understood very well, especially by people that haven't been in the finance space for very long. So hopefully this is going to be useful to you, no matter what your experience or education level is. I think it will be, and I think you'll be convinced at the conclusion that Bitcoin's going up in terms of fiat dollars. So let's start with bonds. Let's start with where bonds begin. Bonds begin with the U.S. government over here. Let's say we have the U.S. Capitol over here to represent the U.S. government. Okay, this is where bonds come from. The government issues this debt, obviously. Now, why do we issue this debt? It's because we want more stuff. We want stuff. Let's say stuff goes here. We elect politicians. We put them in office because we want more stuff. You know, maybe that's another war. Maybe that's more entitlements. Maybe that's a big spending program. Whatever the case, maybe that's stimulus checks. You know, whatever the case is, we want more stuff. And since the government's in charge, we go to the government and we say, we want more stuff. So let's put you in the middle here. You, me, the general voters, we want more stuff. We have a little sign. He's got a really long arm. He wants more stuff, okay? And he's going to use the government in order to get that stuff. Now, how does the government create that stuff? How do we get these entitlements? How do we get Social Security? How do we get the things that we want the government to give us? How do we do that? Well, we have to raise debt. And how do we raise debt? We have to go through the finance committee of the U.S. government. So let's say we want debt here, and these are our bonds. Bond. Okay, this is our bonds. So we, the population, we want stuff, and we say, government, give us bonds. And so the government goes through the treasury. Goes through the treasury here. That's a bad picture of the treasury, but they go through the treasury. So we go to the government. Let's get a different color for our directions here. So when we want more stuff, what do? We say, we demand stuff. We go to the government. We say, government, we want stuff. So the government goes to the treasury and says, treasury, create bonds for us so that we can give the people more stuff. Treasury goes. Treasury creates bonds. What are bonds? Bonds are debt of the government. Debt of the government is really debt of the people. Now, where do these bonds go? These bonds go to a bank. Let's say bank like this. Okay. That's a bad drawing of a bank, but you get the point. So people go to have these bonds. The bonds go to the bank. The treasury issues the bonds on the market. Bank buys the bonds. Okay. Now, what happens when the bank gets these bonds? Well, either they go to clients or whatever the case, but oftentimes, and increasingly more so, and this is something we'll get to more in a minute. Right now, I'm just looking at how it works, and then we'll get into following the feedback loop where it goes in the future. But what do these banks do with these bonds? Well, they go to the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve. Okay, I gotta draw a third building now. Let's say, okay, this is Fed. This is our Federal Reserve. So the banks take these bonds that they just acquired from the Treasury, and they often go to the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. Okay. Now, when they go to the Federal Reserve balance sheet, when they go to the Federal Reserve's balance sheet, what do they exchange for the bonds? They exchange American political currency units. The Federal Reserve manifests dollars out of thin air, just magic. There, magic, poof, into existence, right? And then they go take these dollars and they buy the bonds back from the banks in exchange for the bonds. They take the bonds, they create dollars in exchange for the bonds. Okay, let's rewind a second. I know this might be new for a lot of people, but let's start back for a little bit. The person wants stuff. Person goes to the U.S. government. Government says, okay, we'll get you stuff if you elect me in the office. So we elect him in the office. They go to the Treasury. They say to the Treasury, create debt for us, create bonds. Treasury makes the bonds. The bonds are sold to the banks. The banks take the bonds, go to the Fed, exchange the bonds for the cash. So now we have cash finally flowing into the system. So where does the cash go? Cash goes to the Federal Reserve. I should make this clear that this is cash. Okay, this is US dollars here. The US dollars, where do they go? They go to back to the treasury. Okay, this, ladies and gentlemen, is how we create money. We use the government to create debt. We resell the debt back to ourselves to create cash to inject into the treasury to finally give it to the government. So now we have given it to the government here. The government finally has the cash to give the people the stuff they've demanded this whole time. We now get stuff. Yay, party. Okay, we now have our stuff. We've gone through this process through the banks, through the Federal Reserve, through the Treasury, and through the US government. Actually, I should probably make that a little more clear here. US. Okay, US, that's fine. But anyway, now we have the stuff. Now this is only half the equation. We got a little bit more to go here. So what happens when the stuff is out there? Well, with this, what do you mean with the stuff? The cash has gone now from the Fed to the US Gov. Okay, we have $sign here, $sign here. This cash, this new liquidity is making its way in the system. Now that stuff, it goes to people. It can go to people in the form of Social Security checks. It can go to people in the forms of paying people for roads, paying the men and women in the army. You know, when we want more stuff, whether that's war, roads, entitlements, spending, Medicare, whatever it is, it eventually gets to people. It finally gets to human hand. You know, here's, I think I've got a, yeah, here's some cash on me. Here's a $100 bill. Okay, this cash is created at the Federal Reserve. It goes back to the banks in exchange for the bonds, all the way up to me. You know, I get a stimulus check from the government. This is where it comes from. Okay, you get your Social Security check. This is where it comes from. Okay, all the money that makes its way to the people working for the government, you know, whether the postal office worker or an army general, this is where you get your cash. So now we have the stuff. I have the cash. Where does the cash go? Well, it goes to the banks. Right? I take my $100. I don't want to keep it on me all the time. I decide I'm going to have another little bank here. Okay, it's the same bank, but for the sake of visual, we got to keep it simple here. So now I have my money that I have gotten from the government, and I'm going to take it to a bank. And remember, this little red arrow here is US dollars. Okay, so now we have the money going to a bank. What does the bank do with that money? Well, they do something called fractional reserve lending. This means that if they get, let's say, my $100 I've taken to the bank, now they get to create new dollars. That's right. So let's say that it's 10 to 1. Okay, let's say theoretically it was 10 to 1. I have $100 that I've gotten. I put it in the bank. Now the bank can fractionally lend it out 10 to 1. So let's say that this was my original $100 bills. Now they can create more $100 bills. They can create more money. I can put in my $100. And that now gets lent out to people for the mortgages, for the car payments, for, you know, student loan payments, for whatever the case. My dollars get lent out again and again and again up to a certain threshold. Maybe it's 10x, maybe it's 10 to 1, maybe it's 5 to 1, whatever. Now, something happened in 2020 that most people are not aware of. This right here, reserve requirements were reduced to 0%. Not 3%, not 10%, 0%. Okay, since March of 2020, the limit on this action right here has been 0%. If I deposit this $100 into the bank, they can fractionally lend that out indefinitely. That is really critical to keep in mind, because what all this does, this money creation, this debt creation, this mortgage and borrowing creation, what this does is it creates more dollars out of thin air. We get more dollars, more dollars, more dollars, more dollars, more dollars. Poof, 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 poof. All right, we have more dollars here, more dollars here. Now, what happens? What happens is that as these dollars are made, as we keep creating money, we have more borrowing and lending for our economy and for company. You know, maybe I have like a small business loan that was created via this mechanism. I have this money, I have this business, my business goes out there, it brings value to the market, and I now have to pay taxes, right? So now all this money that we've been earning, that we've been spending and exchanging with each other now has to be taxed. So it goes down to, and please forgive me, I'm going to draw another really bad building. We're going to have another IRS Yes. We have the IRS now, different from the Fed here, but now we have the IRS. These dollars are being taxed. Every year you have to pay taxes. Anyway, so we have the IRS over here, okay? So what happens with the IRS? Where do these profits go? Where do these tax receipts go? From your capital gains on your stocks, from your income, from your income gains, your sales tax, where are all the taxes that are generated from the economy, which is over here, where does that go? Well, it goes one place. It goes to the Treasury, okay? This completes our little system here. Now, well, actually, there's one more part. One more part that's kind of fun is that the Federal Reserve pays profits. Yes, they pay profits, and they pay any profits to the people that own shares in the Federal Reserve. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but it's true that the Federal Reserve has shares and people own those shares. So that's in terms of profits as well. So this is the full system here. This is how the money machine works. This is how money flows in our economy, flows in our government, and flows in our world here. This is how it works. This is a fact. This is not conspiracy. This is not some sort of made up gizmo here. This is the reality, brutal truth of how it works. And so let's follow the incentive structure here. Let's say me, and actually you, okay, this is you. Arrow to you, right? So let's follow it through here. We have American dollars. This is you. You want stuff. You go to the government and say, we want money for stuff. Government goes to the Treasury. Treasury issues the debt. They issue the bonds that go through the banks to the Federal Reserve to create money out of nothing. As it was infamously said in 2020, there's an infinite amount of cash at the Federal Reserve. We create this money, poof, into existence, goes back to the banks, back to the Treasury, through the government to buy us stuff. The stuff goes to the banks. The bank magnifies this money. The money goes into the economy, gets taxed, back to pay the Treasury off for the debt. So what's the feedback loop here? What's the incentive structure? We will perpetually demand more stuff. We will perpetually demand more and more and more. And so therefore, through this mechanism, we will create perpetually more and more and more and more dollars to be injected into the economy, to be magnified more and more and more back into to feed back to the system. And the problem that we have today, is that we are not keeping up. Our tax receipts are not keeping up. This taxable income that the IRS is collecting to feed the Treasury, to pay off the bonds, to eventually pay back shareholders is not enough. There is not enough money. It's sad face. There's not enough, okay? So there's not enough. So what that means is that we have to create more and more and more. We have to create more bonds. We have to create more bonds and more bonds. And the only way to get that through here is then to go back over here and create more cash over here to pay back the bonds so that we can service the losses that we're facing. And so what that means is that gets back over here, which then goes up, creates more and more stuff. We demand more and more stuff. This over here, more and more people demanding more and more stuff simultaneously as we have more and more bonds, which ultimately means that more and more is getting magnified, more and more cash here is being taxed, which still is not keeping up. And so this is the feedback loop here. The more bonds we create, the more cash we create. The more cash we create, the more inefficiencies we create through this. Think inefficiency. More cash is being created, therefore more is being centralized into an inefficiency. More is being centralized into efficiency, we are getting less and less stuff in exchange for that currency that we're creating, gets magnified more, gets taxed more, but still not keeping up. It's a feedback loop perpetually.
So why talk about this? What's the point of laying it out visually and explaining it to people and helping them understand what is really going on here? What's the whole point? Well, the first point is to emphasize the inevitability. You know, people often think that when me or people like me make bold claims about the bond market, about the state of U.S. dollars, U.S. political currency units, or about Bitcoin, people think that we're being overconfident with that. But my perspective, my argument would be that it's not. It's not that overcomplicated. It's really that simple. I mean, it is complicated, but the incentive structure is very simple. We will perpetually want more stuff. We will potentially want more spending. And because we all collectively as a society are addicted to creating this new money and having the money fuel and lubricate everything, we'll perpetually demand the government help us. We'll perpetually demand the government save us. See, the problem is not the U.S. government. The problem is not some boardroom of men in dark suits. You know, if you got rid of every single one of those men, creating these dollars, we'd simply replace them. The problem is that we collectively want to believe the lie, that we can get something for free today. That's a lie. It's simply not true. And we will willingly elect people into positions of power to tell us that we can believe the lie. We want the lie that we can have stuff today for no energy cost. We want to believe the lie that if we just keep pulling the prosperity gains of the future to consume them today, that's going to have no adverse effects in the future. The problem is not the U.S. government. The problem is not the U.S. dollar. The problem is that this is a simple incentive structure that we are always going to do. This is true not just for the US dollar, which I'm talking about exclusively in this video here, but it's true about all fiat currencies. Here I'm getting out my wallet, I'm getting out bolivars. This is a different fiat currency, but it's the same mechanism. Yes, it's a different kind of system. America's system is different in the way at which we do it, but the fundamental reality is the same. Here in America, we will always believe the lie that we can create something for nothing. We'll always just print money into thin air. And likewise, with every other fiat currency, including this one, the worst performing one in the last 10 years, it's the same lie. We want to believe that we can elect someone that will magically give us whatever we want, and we don't have to work for it. And so, therefore, because we'll perpetually demand that lie, we'll perpetually become greater and greater indebted. And because we'll become greater and greater indebted forever, we'll continue to print these dollars in exchange for the bonds, and then keep everything lubricate perpetually, which then the end result, of course, being that prices go up. The more bonds we create, the more debt we create, the more lubrication it requires via new currency that just gets minted out of thin air. The more currency we mint out of thin air, the more that currency is chasing prices, the more it gets fractionally lent and everything else. And the problem is that this inherently leads to centralization. When I talk about why centralization is going to get worse, it has to get worse. Misinformation is going to get worse. Propaganda is going to get worse. Okay, the leaders that are in charge of your local and national jurisdictions, they're going to become crazier and crazier. They're going to get stranger and stranger. You look back in history and you wonder, how could that have possibly happened to that once great empire? How could this have happened to people of the past? And my answer is that it's simple feedback loops. What person is not going to want their stimulus check? Are you going to reject your stimulus check? You're like in a prison. It's like if the government is going to give you free money, and this is the problem when we elect those people to have us believe the lie, is that we become dependent on that. We become dependent on the next Social Security check, the next stimulus check, the next PPP loan, or whatever your entitlement is. We become dependent on it. We become inherently incentivized to become a part of it and give our energy to that because it's our only means of savings. But then the problem is, of course, prices of everything else keep going up, and this is going to continue indefinitely. If housing prices start to fall, if stock prices start to fall, if those tax receipts to the IRS or to the Treasury via the IRS, if those start to go down, then the hole in our bonds becomes even greater. We have to keep printing money. We have to keep raising debt. It is the only way at which this whole thing continues to survive. And as soon as you start going the opposite way, it goes backwards in the feedback loop and the whole thing unravels. We will print currency forever. At what speed? That's anyone's guess. What will we spend it on? That's anyone's guess. The stuff doesn't matter. The people you elect into the U.S. Congress don't matter. The president does not matter. None of these things matter when it comes to will we create more of these or not. Because we have to. If they don't, then we will willingly kick them out and put in someone else that will convince us of this lie. And so, because we are going to continue creating currency perpetually as it trends towards this, bolivars here, as we are going to continue doing that, whether it's slow or fast, I don't know. How much, when, I don't know. But I know we're going to keep doing that. And so I know if I am pricing things in terms of these currency units, then it's going up indefinitely. Housing is going up indefinitely. Energy is going up indefinitely. And Bitcoin is going up indefinitely because Bitcoin is finite. Compared to this, it is finite. Bitcoin has an incentive structure that we didn't fully get into in this video, but Bitcoin is like a sponge for this endless liquidity. As we create more and more liquidity, more and more debt, more and more currency, Bitcoin absorbs that, and that's why Bitcoin's price continues to skyrocket very rapidly. It's because it's soaking up the liquidity. It's soaking up the liquidity that's just oozing out of the system because it has to. It has to find a home, and Bitcoin is the best home. Because real estate, you can just create more real estate. Stocks, yeah, you can just issue more stocks. The only reason those things are scarce is because the government constrains the supply. This is why it's in the government's interest, partially, to constrain housing. And yeah, they can tell you that, oh, we'll get more housing, we'll build more housing, but they do it by creating new loan programs, by lowering the down payment you have to make, by increasing the amortization of loans. We keep doing it because on one hand we have to satisfy the population and the demand for more housing, but on the other hand we can't let housing become too abundant, because if it becomes too abundant and there's too much housing out there, well then people begin to default, people begin to foreclose as housing prices come down and the whole thing begins to unravel. So my point is, Bitcoin is this kind of sponge, and it's the best sponge. It's better than housing, it's better than gold, it's better than copper, it's better than bonds, that's for sure. And my encouragement to you is that if you are saving your purchasing power in this, it is probably a better idea to start saving some of that in terms of Bitcoin, in terms of ones and zeros, backed by electricity, backed by a computer, backed by an algorithm that does not have the human demand to create more. And you may not fully understand how Bitcoin does that, but let me tell you this. If I knew a way that I could create Bitcoin out of thin air, don't you think I would do it? I think I would do it. And I think you would too. Because it's in everyone's self-interest. We want to create stuff that has value out of thin air for free. And if I knew how to create Bitcoin out of thin air for free, I could sell on the market in exchange for these to buy more of whatever else I wanted, including more Bitcoin. So if I knew how to create more Bitcoin out of thin air, don't you think I would do it? If Michael Saylor knew how to create more Bitcoin out of thin air, don't you think he would do it? If the US government knew how to create more Bitcoin, if anyone that has ever been involved with Bitcoin that owns if they knew how to create more, don't you think they would do it? Sell it at a profit and take those profits and buy whatever they want? I do not know how to create more Bitcoin. I know how to create more of these. I know how to create more of these. You just select someone. Like, I don't even know where to begin when it comes to creating more Bitcoin. And that is precisely why Bitcoin is the best sponge. There is no second best sponge for the infinite liquidity loop. All political currencies are trending to zero because all of us demand infinite political currency.